Thank you. I'm distinctly honored to speak to some of the coolest pioneers with their humble achievements for the last 3.5 decades. I really appreciate the work you have done. As a matter of fact, I happen to be the founder and the president of the IPv6 Forum, which was created by the IPv6 task force within the ITF as soon as the RFC 2460 was released back in December 98. At the same time, 3GPP was invented here next door to you at ETSI, which we made as the first killer application. That's why, having smartphones and iPhones, and this is the only place where I don't see a lot of people using them and not listening to my talk. Now, the issue we have is that the internet, the web, and blockchain have been forked to something else which is centralized. So I think our task, and I know it's going to be a lot of work for the next generations to re-centralize, if not restore, the end-to-end model into this thing. Now, I'd like to talk of Jean-Francois. So when you are passionate in your work, you never go on vacation, if not even retire. So I would highly recommend that you follow that principle, because you will see that you did not invent the web, just recently. It was invented a couple of million years ago. I don't see the spider on top of that because of issues of your style of not using PowerPoint. It's a lot easier to do there. So basically, a couple of million years ago, the spiders saw flying food and said that should be the best food. So from their own body, they created a web. And they could even basically conserve food as well. So this is the first creation of fridges in those days. This kind of work has been done by NASA, and I used their slides for a different purpose. So basically, they sprayed caffeine on the spiders, and they start losing its design. So what's your intake of caffeine at the coffee break? Okay? The link to the internet or to the web is when they sprayed marijuana on it. So basically, they have put some kind of testosterone on the spiders. And in the internet, this is what I call marijuana. So basically, NAT has destroyed the end-to-end model. That's why even emails are in the clear. We used to use TLS and SSL, to get, secure email, and that was killed by NAT. So NAT is the worst thing that has happened to the internet, and for that purpose, we have lost about 20 years with NAT, to get IPv6 done. And even some engineers like yours started redesigning basically things like stun, which is an end-to-end restoring, kind of VPN from an IP address to another one. So that's basically the story of how can we restore the decentral service to the end user, to empower them and also to give them privacy. And so this is one of the topics that you are working on. I listened very carefully to some of the speeches on privacy. So in terms of IPv6 deployments on a worldwide basis, we have achieved 60%, despite NAT and despite most of the vendors didn't have IPv6 on ASIC, they had it on software. So the speed of the internet in those days using IPv6 was about 10% of IPv4. So you can imagine that we had to create an interop certification program, to check on whether the guys are using ASIC or using just software. And it took about 5 years until most of the vendors have put IPv6 on their ASIC. So most of the IPv6 deployment is in Asia. So 60% of it, primarily with China. Even most probably they will reach 100%. Although China and India, they have 1.5 billion people, but still 500 million people do not have internet access. So there is more work to be done in this area. So this is really fundamental in our work that we're doing in BSV, and I have two of my colleagues here with me They're going to do a demonstration this afternoon, so I would highly recommend that you see that. We have Connor all the way from Charleston and Jake all the way from central Canada, just for you, to have a chance to talk to you about this one. And in terms of IPv6 used on the web, you should know that the web is the biggest killer application of the internet, and it created millions of companies and millions and billions of dollars. And what's interesting, Cloudflare, as was mentioned by the privacy guru at this house, is deploying IPv6 for the websites. So a lot of countries in Africa do not have internet access with IPv6, but using Cloudflare, they have basically their websites to be IPv6, even using DNSSEC, which is quite unusual. You could check on the banks around the world, they're not using DNSSEC, so really they don't understand security for their own accounts. So there is a bit of a lot of education to be done in this world. So I've got a bit of a disruptive type of approach to the web creations. So a couple of them are a bit disruptive. So I'm not gonna put any blame on anyone, but Web 2 is a fake protocol, okay? And Web 3 also not a fake one. So, and I have listed Dave Raggett because he's very known in Europe, and the work he has been doing on web of IoT is really important, but it needs a lot of work because IoT is a failure so far. IoT has been also only deployed as telecom IoT, so not using any IP protocol. So the only company that's doing now IoT using IPv6 is NTT Docomo in China, and they convert 1.5 million IoT devices into IPv6. Then you have the end-to-end model, and you'll be able to access each device from anywhere in the world, obviously using security and so on and so forth. So the work of Web 3.0 is really fundamental. That's why the interest of the BSV blockchain, to restore the end-to-end model, because it's fundamental to the many use cases that exist. I'm not gonna go into all of these details because you can have the slides, but the work is primarily on open source. And open source, as you know, in the 80s and 90s was too disruptive. That's why a lot of companies didn't want to adopt it. But in the meantime, they have been very smart by adopting open source protocols, but centralizing the service, which means they have access to the privacy data. A lot of people don't know that their data is really important to the industry because this is where they make their money. I'm not gonna put any names, but most of the big companies are using that approach. And one of the purposes is to work together, especially on the solid protocol, combined with blockchain, so you have kind of most probably a killer application in the making. So it will take a bit of time, to get everyone on board by using the solid protocol and in this case, the BSV blockchain design into this thing. But from our perspective as IPv6 Forum, we know that will be the next big killer application, to decentralize the internet and empower people, to do their own transactions directly. As we know, from the IPv6 side, the opening of the address space from restricting the data access to only NAT users is not very optimal. As I mentioned earlier on, email will become secure in the future. This is not the case today. So most of your emails are readable by a lot of people. So don't write anything these days because there's a lot of stuff going on politically. So watch what you are saying in your conferences and your speeches and your papers. Multicast is also not a method of simplifying the use of the internet. Today we broadcast everything like if it is radio. So you misuse a lot of bandwidth, especially if I look at the African territory. They have these sea cables which are very expensive. And the countries do not have internet exchange points as well as root servers. So most of the emails or data and so on is going out of Africa and coming back, which is way too expensive for such a continent, suffering quite a bit. So I've got some use cases, and there are many others, especially in the supply chain. Supply chain is one of the most disrupted in the world, as I know from some of the projects done by IBM in the US. They show that something like 30% of the food is lost only in the chain, in the supply chain. And you have to pay for it because it's put on the end user sales. So streaming is going to be very important in the future, and I think the work that you are doing on this one is quite important. And blockchain will be able to support this, especially that currently, you have to pay for subscriptions instead of paying just for the service that you are using. So the use of micropayments, and especially by optimizing the service, will be very important in the future. The next one is the central bank digital currencies is going to be very important. You would expect a lot of fiat to become critical money, in this case, digital money in the future. So there's a project today in the making, will be announced very soon, called Terranode, which is a very large network with potential over 1 million transactions. With the current models like these cryptocurrencies, they do only up to 7 transactions a second, which is peanuts. That's why even in the Wall Street and so on, it takes about 2 hours. So if you buy something, it would be only processed in 2 hours. And in this case, the price you paid is not going to be enough, so they will reduce the number of shares that you are buying. And the data privacy, obviously, is going to be very critical in the future. So by decentralizing access to the end users, you will give them the power. As you know, I don't think I need to explain this to you because that's the topic you are doing. And it will need a blockchain in order to make sure that you have, in this case, verifiable data. So we see currently with much of what's happening with AI and so on. So AI today is more artificial than intelligent. So I would guess that we have more artificial information than that we need. So you have to verify the data, and you can do that properly only when you have a blockchain with immutable data in the future. So I don't need, I think, to explain this to you because this is what has attracted our attention, to work with W3C, to add it to our implementation on the BSV software. And same thing, is for decentralization and enhanced privacy. And we have a demo which is coming up, I think sometime at 4 o'clock, Connor. So please visit this place to have a look at what it is. Thank you for your attention.